Hello everyone, and welcome to the exercise on object-oriented programming. Here is the instruction for our exercise. It says write a program with a class name myAccount, and its special init method takes three attributes, which are number, name, and balance. Initialize the attributes and also initialize and define a minimum balance attribute and set it to be equal to 500, and also set the account to be active initially by setting it to be true. You will also need two minimum methods, deposit and withdraw methods. The deposit method will add deposit to your amount if the account balance is greater than 0. And the withdraw method will take amount out of your account, and it will require a minimum balance of 500 to be in your account. You will also need two additional methods. One is a set active method that will activate or deactivate your account, and you'll also need another method called, let's say, is active, and that will return true if your balance is greater than 0. So once we write this program, we'll use it to add amount or withdraw if we will be able to withdraw or make a deposit. Okay, great. Now that you have tried the exercise, let's see the solution together. We'll start by creating a class name. We'll name our class myAccount, and we'll define our method, our special init method, and it takes self as its first attribute and number, name, and balance. Then let's instantiate this attributes. So the first one is this number. That's basically our account number. So you can say self that account number. Self that account number is equal to number. Next, let's initialize the name. Self that name is equal to name. So that will be the account holder's name. And finally, we have our balance. Self that balance is equal to balance. And let's also instantiate a minimum amount balance. So self that minimum balance is equal to, let's set it to be 500. And finally, we'll have a self that active, and we'll set it to be true. So later on, we'll have a method called set active, and that will set, by default, it will be active. That means if the balance is greater than 0. Otherwise, our account will be inactive. Okay. Now that we have defined our init method, let's define another method called deposit. So this method accepts self as its attribute and an amount. So we'll use this method to deposit money to our account, and our account has to be positive. Okay, the balance has to be greater than 0. Otherwise, we won't be able to deposit. So this method, this will deposit amount to our account if balance is greater than 0. This will deposit amount if account balance is greater than 0. Okay, so we can say if self that is active, we'll define this method later on, and this method is active if balance is greater than 0. So if self that is active, we can say self that balance plus equal to amount, right? So self that balance is equal to self plus balance plus the new amount we deposited. And this method will then return true if the condition is true. If the if condition is true, it will return true. Whereas if this if condition is false, what's going to happen? So let's have an else statement. Else, let's print something like you will need to go to the nearest branch or something like that. So if their account is less than or equal to 0, they will have to go to the nearest branch and make that deposit or something like that. So in that case, we'll return false. Okay, that's good. Next, let's define a method for withdrawing money, and let's call it withdraw, and it takes two attributes, self and amount. So what this method does is that it just withdraws money from our account, and we'll need a minimum balance of 500. So this will withdraw amount if balance is greater than 500. Okay, let's define a variable called result, and we'll set it to be false initially. So if this condition is not true, the result will be false. And for a person to withdraw money, first of all, the account has to be active and the balance has to be over 500. So let's have those conditions. If first it has to be active, right? So if self that is active, again we'll define this method later on. If self that is active, that's one condition, and the second one is our balance amount, right? And if self that balance minus the amount we want to withdraw, it has to be greater than or equal to 500, right? So greater than or equal to self that, and 500 is our minimum balance. So if it's greater than or equal to self that minimum balance, we can say, so they will be, in this case, they will be able to withdraw money. And then we'll need to calculate the new balance after they withdraw money. In that case, the new balance, self that balance, is equal to the old balance minus the amount. So we'll set it to be equal to minus equal amount. So self that balance is equal to self that balance minus amount, right? So, and then at this point we'll set the result to be true. That means successful withdrawal at this point. And then let's have our else condition. Else we can print, or else we'll print a message like you will need a minimum balance of greater than 500. That should work. Then we'll finally return the result. Then return result. So we'll start with a default result of false, and if the account is active and if the balance is over the minimum balance, or we can make this greater than the minimum balance, which means over 500. Will return, they will be able to withdraw, and our method will return true, or else we'll display this message: you'll need a minimum balance of greater than 500, and then we'll return the result. Next, let's define two functions. I think we need two more methods: the setActive method and the isActive method we have seen so far. Let's do that. So define a method called setActive, and it takes self as its attribute and another account, some other attribute, let's say account. Okay, ACTT, that's just an attribute, and this is just to activate or to deactivate our account. Okay, this method will activate or deactivate our account. Okay, so we'll set it to be self that active is equal to our attribute act, and finally we'll have our function is active, our method is active, and then it takes self as its attribute. So this will return true if the balance is greater than 0. So if self that balance is greater than 0, our method will return self that active, or else it will return false. Else return false. So if the balance is greater than 0, it will return self that active. Self that active is true by default. Oh, this is also self. So this is self, and if the balance is less than or equal to 0, it will return false. Okay, let's see what we did here. Our init method takes 3 attributes in addition to self: name, number, and balance. So we initialized our attributes here. Self.account number is equal to number, self.name is equal to name, and balance. And we initialized a minimum balance of 500. And we set our account to be active initially. Right, self.active is equal to true. Then we define a method called deposit, and we have a method to withdraw, setActive, and isActive. We'll continue our discussion in the next lecture. Thank you, everyone.